method by which we identify primary, secondary, and tertiary charge groups. Now I just want to talk a little bit about primary charge groups. We have some examples here from period armorials. Primary charge groups are the, as the name says, the primary charge group on a piece of armory. It's always what's mentioned first after the field because it's the most important part of the armory. A piece of armory may only have one primary charge group. Anything else has to be either secondary or tertiary. It's always found in the center of the armory, and it's usually the biggest item. Primary charge groups can contain different charges, such as a lion and a tiger combatant. We would know that they're primary together because they're described together in one position or arrangement. So that's how you know that they're a single group. There's no requirement for a piece of armory to have a primary charge group. You would think that, oh, it's primary, that means it's the most important thing, but when it comes to charge group theory, that there's no, did we have a problem with the slide advancing?
Yes, we're not seeing the slide move forward.
Okay, well, hold on just a second. Can you see it now?
We do. We see the slides on the side and the main slide in the center.
And now did it change?
If you change the slide, it did not update, no.
Oh boy, I wonder
We
why.
see charge group theory is what we see.
Okay, good. And now you see the regular screen with the PowerPoint stuff?
No, not yet. Like I said, we see all the slides on the side. Well, we see 7 slides on the side. Yes, now it changed. You have a lot of lag.
So there's a lot of lag. All right. All right. So there. All right. So now we're on to charge group theory. And now you can see, you should be able to see in just a moment, my period armory with our title here. This is charge group theory. Is that right? All right. Wow, that's a lot of lag. All right, well, I can keep talking about this while we're waiting for it to update. Somebody put it in the chat when it updates, okay?
I'll just leave my mic open and tell you.
That works great. All right, so primary charge groups, as I said, can contain different charge groups, and there's no requirement for a primary charge group to appear in your piece of armory. Wow, that's really laggy. If you, for example, had a piece of armory that had a background and then nothing in the center with just a border around the outside, then that would have a field and then a secondary charge group, and there would be no primary charge group. Oh, come on, computer. All right.
Did you link that in the event? Maybe I can run it and advance the slides for you.
Say that again?
Did you link your PowerPoint in the event?
No, I didn't. All I did was give links in the event.
Okay, it changed now.
Wow.
So give it like 2 minutes.
Right. Okay.
Just talk.
All right. Well, I need to go on to the next slide. Actually, I don't. We can wait. All right. So with primary charge groups, many of the changes that appear in your primary charge groups are what's called a substantial change. And that means that makes them completely clear or different from another piece of heraldry, which, you know, is the goal when we're doing conflict checking, is to make sure that everything gets clear so that you're not similar to somebody else. Secondary charge groups and tertiary charge groups kind of go by the same rules. They aren't, any single change to those groups isn't enough on its own to clear a piece of armory from another piece of armory. And secondary charge groups are those that are on or around the primary charge group and on the field. They can never create a substantial change, but you can have what's called 2 distinct changes, 2 or more, to use this group to clear a conflict with another piece of armory. Overall charges and peripheral ordinaries, and we'll talk a little bit about ordinaries in just a minute, are secondary charges. An ordinary is a plain geometric shape. It almost always goes from edge to edge on the shield, or touches the edges in some way. And we're pretty familiar with the Mid-Realm's most famous ordinary, the pale, which is that big red stripe that goes down the center of our armory. That is a ordinary. It is the primary charge in our kingdom's armory. There are a bunch of others. We do have some reference materials on the internet that you can look if you're interested in what is an ordinary, what's a central ordinary versus what's a peripheral ordinary. But I trust that you are all quite smart enough to look those things up on your own. Tertiary charges, secondary charges still. You can have more than one secondary charge group, and you can have more than one tertiary charge group. So they would be both secondary charge groups, but they could be different secondary charge groups. And tertiary charge groups, the main thing you need to know about tertiary charge groups is that they are never, ever on the field. They don't touch the field in any way. They are wholly on top of another charge or ordinary. And they can appear on a secondary charge group, or they can appear on a primary charge group. I've just changed the slide, so hopefully it catches up soon. We do have some oddities that I'd like to talk about just a little bit. Things that don't really quite fit very neatly into the primary charge group that's always described right after the field, and then secondary and tertiary. We have sustained and maintained charges. Now, we need to know the difference between a sustained and a maintained charge. A sustained charge is really big. It's considered part of the charge group, as like part of the, if it's got two parts. Say, for example, I know you can't quite see it yet, but there's a bear on this slide with holding a laurel wreath. The bear and the wreath may be a single charge group together. Now, in this case, that laurel wreath is small, so it would be a maintained charge. If it was nearly the same size as the bear, it would be a sustained charge. And you can get a difference for sustained charges, but not maintained charges. They are blazoned because they were important to the submitter. So that's why they were included, but they don't count for a difference, a DC. And the way that I like to remember them is sustained charges are significant and maintained charges are minor. That helps me remember which is which. Overall charges are a special kind of charge. They appear on top of other charges and on top of the field. And so they touch the field. So you think because they touch the field, they are a type of secondary charge group. But they also go over top of another charge. And normally when we have a charge on top of a charge, we would require that it would be contained wholly within the charge it's on top of, but an overall charge is not. Our dragon on our armory is a good example of an overall charge. He sits on top of that pale, but he also is big enough to go on either side of the pale and sit on the field as well. A semi of charges is a scattering of charges, usually on the field, but you can have a semi of charges on another big charge. And a semi of charges is always a secondary charge group because they are small. Thank you very much. But they are a type of secondary charge group because they're small, but they lay on the field. So we blazon them with the field. So we would say, for example, I don't know if you can see that slide yet, but that we'd have, no. We would have ghouls, a semi of crutches, and then 3 bendlets per bend, 3 bendlets argent. And then we have something called field primary armory. I think I'm I wonder if I hit refresh if it would go. No? All right.
Yes, we're on oddities now.
Wow. Okay.
Why don't you try refreshing every time you change your screen, your slide?
Okay, yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit refresh every time I change my screen. Then, okay. So you can see there in the the third example there, that semi of crutches on top of the red field. And that's an example of a semi. They appear on the field. We know it's the field because the top and bottom stripes are both red, not one red, one white. That's a red field with a semi of crutches and then white stripes over top of it. And then field primary is the last category of oddities. We judge field primary armory differently than we judge armory with charges on it. And so they have their own set of rules, and those rules can be found in SENA A5F. SENA is the standards for the evaluation of names in armory. And at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, there will be a link. I've also made a small post in the event group that also has the link in it. So if you're trying to conflict check field primary armory, it's best for you to just go right to SENA and review the rules for field primary armory. All right, did it change?
Not yet.
No, I think I know what makes it change.
Now it did.
Yeah, I have to exit out of the slide every time to make it change.
Okay, that sucks. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. This is a learning experience for all of us. So what is a conflict? Oh, my cat is making awful noises. A conflict in the SBA, a conflict is the way in which, in heraldic language, by which you are saying that you are a close personal family member of another person. In history, we would have what are called cadency steps, and each father-son cadency step would add something to the heraldry. Now, of course, the label is the most famous kind of cadency step, excuse me, but other heraldic or other heirs of a particular noble family could also have their own armory. But if they weren't the heraldic heir, they would have to do something to differentiate themselves from their brother. So you can, hopefully you can see, we have here a line of family members here, and we have the first one there on the left, that's Ghouls, 3 lions, passant, head of fronty or. And he's got a bunch of sons and grandsons here. And we can see that each one of these things, except for number 4 there, is just one cadency mark away from the original piece of armory. So with the exception of number 4, all of those would conflict because they only have one distinct change. Number 4 there is the son of number 5, and he has 2 distinct changes from the first piece of armory there. That would make him like a grandson. And we allow that distance in heraldic language in the SDA. So when we're conflict checking, what we're going to look for is one. So yes, it is, but so the question is cadency allowed in the SDA? And if somebody has a kid in the SCA and they have heraldry and their kid wants to use the cadency mark, can they? Yes, they can. We do have a permission to conflict form specifically for that, where you can attest that someone is your legal heir, or they are your legal family member, and then they can use a cadency mark and use your armory with a cadency mark. That is perfectly acceptable. We can use the permission to conflict form for a lot of things. And one of them is if you don't care if somebody is using similar heraldry to you. So yes, it is allowed. A lot of people will let their kids run around with their own armory with cadency marks on them without registering them. And that's perfectly fine too. But we do allow cadency. You just have to file a form to allow someone to use your heraldry as if they were your child. That's all. So we require a substantial change, which is basically in heraldic language saying we are not related, or 2 distinct changes to clear a piece of armory from conflict. Again, you can file permissions to conflict if you don't care if somebody conflicts with you or not. There are two different kinds. There's a specific permission to conflict in which somebody contacts you and says, hey, I'd like to have something that's similar to yours. Can I? And you say, yes, this specific person is allowed to register this specific thing with my permission. And the other one is called a blanket permission and conflict, where you can allow anybody to conflict with your armory as long as it's not identical. Even if you allow it, we will never register something that is identical to what you have. So I highly suggest people file blanket permissions to conflict if they're amenable to that, because it frees up the heraldic space for other people to have nice, simple armory. Not to say that there isn't nice, simple armory available, but you know, most of us don't give a crud what somebody in the West does. We're in the mid-realm. We're probably never going to meet that person. Okay. So when you're conflict checking for this, you may only compare primary groups against primary groups, secondary groups against secondary groups, and tertiary groups against tertiary groups. That is the biggest reason we learn charge group theory, is because you have to compare apples to apples. See, there's the Oswin there has indicated he needed to get permission to conflict for his armory, so he's familiar with the process. Sometimes it's really hard. If you are trying to conflict with somebody who registered their stuff in 1983, they may be dead. They may be gone. They may not be reachable anymore. So we like to have those things on file if you're amenable to it. All right. Next slide.
Changed.
Yay. All right. So you see the slide that says substantial change and distinct change, right?
Correct.
Excuse me. You know, I talk for a living. You'd think I would know to stay hydrated. So here are some examples of what I was talking about with the substantial change versus the distinct change. You see here we have in the top one substantial change. Those two look fairly similar, but we have some rules about what constitutes a substantial change and what does not. And one of those, in this specific example, we have a change of type of charge. The one on the left is a single circle of red, or 3 circles of red, and then the one on the right are amulets. They are, as far as heralds go, completely different. Another change that's in this is that there are 3 of them, and in the other one there is 6, and 6 counts as a semi in primary charge groups. So these are completely different on 2 different fronts. These people would not be related at all. The lower one, they're the distinct changes example. You can see the first piece of armory has one distinct change from the middle one. We put a bend overall over top of that, which has a distinct change from the second one, which has another charge group on the bend. So each of those conflicts with their neighbor, but the ones on the outside ends don't conflict with each other. Okay.
Changed.
What kinds of charges count for substantial change, or what kinds of changes count substantial changes versus distinct changes? The ones there in the, now remember, you can only have a substantial change applied to a primary charge. It doesn't apply to any other type of charge group. So the ones there in the dotted box, those are all examples of ways that you can get a substantial change in your primary charge group. We have the change in type from those gulps to the lions. We have a change in number here from 3 to 2. Now that only counts if there are 1, 2, 3, or 4. Anything above 4 counts, conflicts with 4 for trying to get a substantial change in a primary group. We have posture there. You see those 2 little flags. Those are flags of armory from 2 of the barons who signed the Magna Carta. We have one here that's rampant and one here that's passant. That would be a significant change in posture, and that would get you a substantial change. Or then the change of arrangement. Here we have in this fourth example, a yellow field with 3 black amulets, but one of them, they're all infest, and one of them, they're 2 and 1, the standard arrangement for 3 items on a field. And that would also get you a substantial change. For other ways that we can change, especially with secondary and tertiary charge groups, which is where you're going to get the most changes, anything on this page could count as a distinct change. So you can also do things like add or remove a tertiary charge group. You can change the color of a secondary charge group. You can change the field. The field only ever counts for 1 distinct change, no matter how many changes you make to it. So because with Armory with charges on it, the charge is the important thing. The field is kind of secondary. So that's why it only gets 1 DC. And then the features of the item that you're trying to compare. Now in this one, that is a bend, and a bend is automatically a primary charge group, but I want you to use it as an example. For example, in this one, there's a change in the type of line. It's a straight plain line bend versus a jagged line bend or complex line bend. And in a secondary charge group, that would also get a DC. Let me take a look at my notes. Now, when we're talking about arrangement, that one there in the center, I just want you to know that forced changes don't count for a change in arrangement. If you have half a field and half that field is black, and then you have 3 amulets across the top, you only get 1 DC for the field, because that you can't put black amulets on a black field. So that would be a forced change of arrangement, and that doesn't count for a DC. But if it could be that way and it isn't, that does count. And the same thing for changes of posture. You have to compare apples to apples. You don't get a change of posture if you've got a lion and an apple, because those, you can't make an apple rampant. They don't work. Apples can't ramp. All right, and roundish inanimate changes. Posture also counts for like orientation. So for example, you use posture as a word for animals, and then orientation for non-animate things like towers and plants and stuff like that. But roundish inanimate charges, you can't use posture or orientation as a way to get a substantial or a distinct change, because they're round. It doesn't matter which, like visually from 30 feet away, you're not really going to be able to tell if it's upside down or right side up if it's round. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. I'm not hearing anybody piping up, so we can continue to go on.
You answered this posture change question in the chat.
Here we go. Let me take a look. It just popped up. So a bow facing left for a bow facing right is a posture change. There is a precedent of bows specifically, and I would have to look up. It's a potential posture change, but I think in the bows specific case, it doesn't count. But there's a precedent about bows specifically, so you'd have to go and look at the precedent to get the answer for that. It's possibly one, could be not. Heraldry is a lot like law. We go based on what decisions were made in the past. And if you want to challenge it, you can challenge it. And then they make another decision. So field changes. Now, I want to talk about field changes because even though all of these are field only armory, can you see them?
Yes.
Good. Even though all of these are field only armory, I want to use these to be more clear about showing you what a change in a field looks like when you're trying to judge whether or not it gets a DC. It doesn't matter how many changes you make to the field, it only ever gets 1 DC. So you really only have to count 1, and then you're like, oh, that's it. That's all I needed. And you can see here in the center, we have a nice plain Italian armory, Peripheral, ghouls, and argent. And we've made some changes, but in the top left one, we've made a change. It's Peripheral, ghouls, and or. that counts as a DC. It's a change of at least half the field. Another way that you can change that is direction. The top right one there, the line of division is no longer straight up and down. It's now per bend. That counts as a DC. You can get a style change. So for example, on the bottom left, we have a wavy line versus the straight line. That could get you a DC. And then for the last thing that could get you a DC, number of pieces. In the center piece, we have 2 pieces. And in the bottom right-hand side, we have 8 pieces. That would only get you 1 DC, but it does get you a DC. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about charge group theory before we really start getting on to the meat and potatoes of conflict checking? Do you feel like you basically understand how charges are compared and the things that you can compare?
Kind of, sort of.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any response in the chat, and I'm not hearing anyone on the chat, so I'm gonna assume that you do understand. If you don't, please feel free to message me after the class. Okay, good, all right. Please feel free to message me after the class if you have questions. I am more than happy to answer questions after the class or via email or via Facebook chat. That's all really good. Excuse me. So we're going to take an example here. Do they conflict? And our first example here is the top right-hand side, these 3 lions, and then 3 lions with the border. Little Jeopardy music here. And the answer is yes, they do conflict because there's only 1 DC. We added a secondary charge group, and that's it. So you can't pass that second one there. It conflicts with the first one. For the second item here, we have the item on the left. And the answer is no, they don't conflict. We have a change in number of the primary charge group, and which is a substantial change all on its own, so it counts by itself. But we also have a DC for the field, and then a DC because the lions are blurred, or they're ermined rather than plain white. And so it basically, like Uber, does not conflict. And then for the last example here on the bottom, we have one. Those look pretty similar. Do they conflict?
No.
And the answer is no, they don't. Because we've had a major change of primary charge group. That chevron is an ordinary, and it's considered a central ordinary because it's in the middle of the shield. So it is completely, a chevron is completely different from 3 red dots. And so even though there are also 3 red dots on the one on the left, they're the secondary charge group, and we can only compare primary charge groups to primary charge groups. So they don't conflict. Search forms. Search forms are a godsend. And the search form that everybody wants to learn how to use is the complex search form. You can see it there in green. This is a screenshot from the oanda.sca.org. That would be the search forms for the ordinary and armorial. And we have a lot of ways we can search for something. And if you are unfamiliar or uncomfortable using the complex search form, we definitely suggest that you use the top link there. That is the index to the online ordinary. What that pulls you up is an index, is an alphabetized index of everything that we register and by classifying its primary charge group. So you can click on that. Say you click on, you're looking for a hay fork. You're going to click on H and then go down to hay fork, and it'll probably say see staff. And then you go back up and you click on S and you go down to staff, or maybe it'll say agricultural tool. And you click on that, and then you click on the link itself, and it will show you everything that has a hay fork or an agricultural tool or a staff, depending which one you chose. registered, and you can sift through those by hand if you don't have any other options, or if you don't feel comfortable using this search form. But this search form will definitely cut your time out. It'll cut your time down quite a bit. And you can think of it like, it's not a process of elimination. The complex search form is like, it's like if you use a Boolean search, which is a math logic term, and you use the AND function. So everything you put, you can see a screenshot of the complex search form there on the right. Everything you put in that pattern blank, if you use 2 lines, you can think of it as like having an AND between them. And so it'll ask you, and it will return everything that has and, whatever terms you put in each of those lines together. And it will return them based on, we've seen there's a sort here, score and blazon. And so we'll talk about score in just a minute. Let me review my notes for a minute. So the way this works is because every time somebody gets a piece of armory registered, we code it for what is in it and then put it in a database. And the coding just makes this searchable. Remember that what we're actually registering when we register armory is the picture. So when you do a complex search form and you pull up results on here, remember that you're actually searching a proxy. This is just a way for heralds to use a database to codify everything that's been registered, to search it more easily. But what we actually register is a picture. So if there's ever any question, really, does this conflict or not, what we will do is ask the archivist to grab you the picture, and then we'll just actually compare them. But we use the complex search form to search the database because it's fast. And you can see in the yellow box there that there are a few different ways that you can use the complex search form. Say, for example, if you saw somebody on the battlefield and you knew that they had lions on their shield, and they had a blue background, and somebody called them Sir Bill. You could probably go here and type in the name pattern and put Bill, and then use the armory description to add lions and blue field, and you might find a short list of people who are named Bill who have a blue field with lions on their arms. So that way you could get their name and maybe write them a thank you letter for being so chivalrous on the field. Like, you can use this form for more than just conflict checking. That's an option. It's a very powerful little tool, but we're going to use it for conflict checking. While you're learning how to conflict check and using the complex search form, I want to highlight the item that's in pink at the bottom of the complex search form. The standard setting for that is disabled. And as you're learning, I find it very helpful to enable the armory descriptions. The armory description is the coding itself, and it will show you if you ask it to. So that you can look, you can read a blazon and then look and see how it's coded. If you ever have any questions about how something is coded, it's very helpful when you're learning. Okay, so how do I use this thing? Well, it has a magic key, and that magic key is a file called mycat. Mycat is a text file. You would get to it by typing in my.cat at the end of the ona.sea.org website. And then it's a text file that will either pop up automatically or it'll ask you to download it. Depends on your operating system as to which it does. But it is magic. It contains 3 parts. It has the first part, which is features, as the second part, which is categories, which is the one you'll probably actually use the most. And then it has a reference section at the bottom, a see other section. The category section, that second section there, you can see that it has an entry and then a pipe, which is that vertical line, and then a all caps description. I'd like to highlight one particular one there. That would be line 420, the bend sinister line. You can see that they're all caps, but you can also see that unlike the other ones, this one doesn't actually say bend sinister. It's got an abbreviation, BS, and you can go ahead and snicker. But when you put it into the pattern field in the complex search form itself, if you want to pull up something that's got bend sinisters, you need to put capital B, capital S, and nothing else. Because if you type in Ben Sinister, it won't recognize it. This is it's got a very narrow grammar. So you would type in the B and the S, and then you put a colon after it, the two little dots. And then you'd file in the features. So we have a category, and then we have features. And you can combine multiple features on one line. But the important part for you to note is that you may only put one DC on each line. So if you change that thing, it would give you one DC. Let's just take a look. You can see here in the MyCat with line 205 in the top section there of features. There's some syntax going on there. You have number :1, less than sign 4 or fewer, less than sign 3 or fewer, less than sign da 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 da. It actually goes on quite a ways, but for visual sake, I clipped it. What that is saying there is that this feature, this feature, a feature of number. Okay, so any charge can have a number of charges, right? Remember that gets us a DC. Has a value of 1. And that value of 1 is contained within the value of 4 or fewer. And it also says that the value of 1 is contained within the value of 3 or fewer, and it's contained within the value of 2 or fewer. These aren't commutative. They don't, 4 or fewer is not contained within 3 or fewer. It's only the first value compared to each section. So if you're looking for something and you type in 3 or fewer, what you're going to have it's going to give you is 3 or fewer. It's going to give you 3, 2, and 1. And this is the way that the search form tells what is contained within each particular value. And then line 810 there in the bottom section in the reference section, I just want to highlight that. 810 there we have the abalone. And you might look at somebody's heraldry and say, this is an abalone. I don't know how to code that in the MyCat. Or maybe you're a scribe and you're like, what in the world is an abalone? I don't even know. You go here, you look at it and it says C, shell, other. Okay, and so now you take shell other and you search for that in the file. You Control F to search. And eventually it will take you to the category section where shell other will have a all caps code that you can use in the complex search form. I know it sounds like a lot, but Control F really cuts a lot of this work time down. So does anybody have any questions at this point? Because I know that was a lot of information in a little tiny package. Okay. So now let's go on. Oh, okay, good. Now let's go on to the practice items. Ta-da! We're gonna have some practice here. Excuse me. Dame Cream Help has graciously allowed us to use her badge as a practice item. And I chose this because it's nice and simple. So when you're breaking down, this is the method by which you're going to break a piece of armory down so that you can code it into the complex search form. So we always reserve the first line for the field. Technically, you can put it anywhere, but I always reserve the first line for the field because it's a good practice to get into. And the field here is red. If you were to use the MyCat to search field ghouls, you would come up with a category of GU. Did that change? Does anybody see the word GU with the ghouls on it?
Yes.
Oh, good. So that part works in this slideshow. Wonderful. Excuse me. And so you would put GU in the first line for the field. That's all you need to do. Anything that's just G, capital U, means a ghouls field. Then you would identify the primary charge group and its features. And remember that we put 1 DC. Now, in this case, there's substantial changes because it's a primary charge group, but we're still going to put each feature on one line. So we have here 3 nails, 3 passion nails. They are black. There are 3 of them, and they have a particular arrangement. They are in pile. And so we describe it there as 3 passion nails in pile stable. And then we code it as 3 different lines. Nail, primary, because it's the primary charge group, and then stable. nail primary 3, and then arrangement in pile primary. What this will now return is an and between each one of these 4 search terms. Ghouls and nails primary stable and nails primary 3 and arrangement in pile in the primary charge group. And then it will rank it when you hit return. And when it ranks it, it will show you everything that matches all 4 first, and then everything that matches just 3, and then everything that matches 2, and then everything that matches 1. And so if we were to hit search on that, this is what we would see. There it is, Dame Creamheld with her ghouls, 3 passion nails, and pile stable. And then you can see the actual coding that appears in the system. And as you can see here, the line for nail is actually 1 entry. It's nail 3, and then this G3PA, which we'll talk about later in the class, and then stable. Make sure. So there's a comment here. It says, so it looks like for each aspect to make sure there's no conflict for each aspect number, color, arrangement. Yeah, exactly. Right. You put, you basically, you're asking the form to return, you know, to examine each thing and tell you how many of these search terms it matches, right? Because each one of those things, if you change it, then it's got a DC. In this case, it's a substantial change because it's the primary group. But with the search form, it's still useful because you're returning scores. And so the thing you need to know about the complex search form is that you only have to search your max scores items and your max score -1 items. Anything that's got 2 or more less than your max number of search terms, so this has 4 search terms, we only have to look at the things that have 4 and 3, because if there's more than 2 things different, it automatically clears it. So for example, if we were looking at this and we were taking a look at that, we would only have to look at the first one and then 2 others. That's right. It really cuts down your time as long as you code it right. So let's go on to the next item. Did that change?
No, we have not seen a new screen yet.
That's fine.
There it is.
I don't know why it does that.
Hmm.
All right. Now we have this. And for any of you who know me, you would know that's my own armory. And so we're just going to go through and practice on this one. Now let's identify the field. The field in this case is the green and blue section. It is per pale, vert, and azure. And as you can see, per pale has its own category, and then it has 2 sections here. Now, when you have a divided field or a divided charge, you always want to list the one that you say first, alone. So vert, in this case, it's alone. And then azure is not alone. It has a tilde and an and a space. That tells the computer, no matter which order you put them in the line, which one is first and which one is second. Because of course, if you were to compare this to a piece of armory that has blue on the left-hand side and green on the right-hand side, that gets a DC. So we don't want to be comparing those. We want to be comparing things that have green on the left and blue on the right. The primary charge group here is the star. It is yellow. There is 1 of them, and it has no tertiary charges on it. So there are our 3 main search forms, and you can see the UNC, it actually stands for uncharged. You could type uncharged. The system will also recognize that, but I like to use UNC because it's fewer things for me to type. And then we have a secondary charge group. We have a peripheral ordinary there. It's automatically secondary, and it is that teeth, and it has features. Now you don't, with a peripheral ordinary, you technically could have one of some other kinds of peripheral ordinaries like orals, but you can only ever have 1 chief. So we don't need to code that it's a 1 because there's only ever going to be 1 chief. But we can code that it's white, and we can code that it has a fancy line. And so we have here a chief engrailed argent. And if we put all of those things, that's 6 search terms, we only have to look at the items that are 6 and then the items that are 5. And if we put it in the system, this is what we get. We have here the chief, it's listed, the field is listed, it's listed as multicolored dark as its primary color, and it's listed as peripheral. And you can see, like, I didn't know that the peripheral has a plain line, but it could. And then the star, and those are all the different ways that this item could be coded in the system. And so if I were looking at this, I would have to look at this one, and then I would have to look at those 6 matching items with a score of 5 to just manually check, does this conflict? If it doesn't, then we're good. Let me just review my notes to see if there's anything else I need to say about this. And then, nope, we're good. Okay. And then for the last major, well, the last practice item that's a SCA registered heraldry, we have my husband's badge. Now this is a fieldless badge. And remember, we leave that first line available for a field, but with a fieldless badge, you have to know that fieldless badges get a DC from any other field, even other fieldless badges. And so you're just going to leave that line blank. Don't put anything in there. There is a code for fieldless. Don't do it. And then you're going to identify this primary charge group of his sea camel leopard. And with a monster, what we want to do is we want to have one line that indicates that it's a monster, and then the other lines are going to tell us what the live half is, what the upper half is. And so in here we have a giraffe. This giraffe is rampant. It has no tertiary charges on it. I know those circles look like tertiary charges, but they're actually just internal detailing. Okay, so I'll get to that comment in just a moment, after we're done with this example. So there's one giraffe, he's yellow, he's rampant, and he's uncharged. And he's a sea monster. So there are our search terms for the primary group, and because this is a fieldless charge with no secondary charges on it, we don't have to search any secondary charges because there isn't any. And we would search this, and this is what we would get. We have 5 search terms, and the only item with a score of 5 is this one that's registered, and there are 3 more with a score of 4 that you would have to look at to make sure they don't conflict. Now, there was a comment here, a question. It says complex line is a bit general. Wouldn't the change of line be a conflict if it was a zigzag rather than bumps? Or is complex line? So the answer to that is that lines have subcategories, and some conflict with it. They don't get a difference from each other, and some do get a difference from each other. So you would refer to STINA if you wanted to. Now you can, there are ways to code this in the system. You can, like, for example, if it's a Dancetti line, you would code it as jagged. If it's a wavy line, you code that as wavy. If it's a ERDI, you know, like there are groups of line codings that you can use. But for the purposes of this example, I'm just using plain or complex. Does that answer your question? Wonderful. Yep. Again, keep your STINA close to your heart. It will lead you in a path that you will not falter in. All right. So the next item that we're going to look at is a piece of period armory. Say someone came to you with this piece of armory and said, I'd really love this. Can I have it? Let's go ahead and conflict check this. The field is blue, so it gets an AZ on the first line. And then our primary charge group is the chevron. There's one chevron. It's white. It has a plain line and it's uncharged. Okay. And then we have some secondary charge groups, and we also have a tertiary charge group in this thing, which I'm not going to code in, because by the time you get down to tertiary charge groups, you're really picking the barrel. but it's possible. You can use it. And now you see here that we have, it says primary, that we indicated primary. If you don't put anything, it checks everything. But you can also indicate that those swan heads are a secondary charge group by putting second or secondary instead of primary in the line. I just haven't. So there are 3 swans. They're standard facing to the left, to stage right. And they are erased, and they're bird heads. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And they're charged. They have a tertiary charge on them, that crown, gorged of a crown. In this case, gorging is a type of maintaining, but it counts. It's got a charge. And so you would have 3 white swans erased, each gorged of a crown. They're white, they're 3, and they're charged. And if we were to search that in the O and A on the complex search form, this is what we get. We have 8 search terms here and just 1 item with a 7. So that's the only one that we would have to look at. And in this case, our tertiary charge groups, you can get DCs from tertiary charge groups. And remember that you can only get 1 DC per type of change. So that slide I showed you all those types of changes. And in this case, we have a type of change of the color, because you have roses versus crowns, and they're yellow crowns and red roses. And you have a change of number. There were 3 crowns and there are 5 roses. And so this clears. This would be clear, and you could fairly confidently tell that a customer that they should try to register this piece of arms. All right. So next, we're going to talk about something that is tricky: split charge groups. Excuse me. Split charge groups are real tricky to do in the complex search form, because because of the way we conflict check them. When you have a charge group, a change of at least half of the charge group counts as a DC, or in the case of a primary charge group, a substantial change. So you do want to be able to identify what constitutes a change of half of the charge group. So we're going to use this first example here, this lion with the 3 frogs. There are 4 charges there. Half the charge group should be 2 charges, right? No, in this case, because the lion is above the line of division and the frogs are below the line of division, the lion is 1/2 of the charge group and the frogs are the other half of the charge group. And you can search for them using this fancy little code here, GPA. GPA stands for group primary, and in this case, alone on the field. There are other codes. You'll see them on the next slide. Is everyone okay?
It's me, sorry.
That's fine. Okay. So in this case, GPA stands for group primary, and it's alone on the field, which means that there's no other secondary charge groups on the field. And so each half of those would be half. And what you would do is you would search your first form with just the Cat 1 GPA, and then you would do another search, a second search, with the amphibian frog GPA. And see, there's 3 frogs there. And that would find everything. So for example, if you had a thing with 4 frogs on it, it would pull that up as 4 frogs. And in that case, you wouldn't have changed half the charge group, because half of that charge group is 2 frogs. So like there's special rules. Definitely refer to Sina when you're trying to conflict check split charge groups. But know that it's possible. It's just hard. I definitely suggest that you, if you're new at the split charge groups, that you seek a second opinion. For this other one, we're going to take a look at this lovely piece of armory with the very poorly drawn profess, the dog between 2 crescents. Now, depending on the size of those charges, those might actually be a dog as the primary charge with the crescents as the secondary charge, or it could, but for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to assume that it's a charge group all its own. And you can see that they've had a forced move of position on the field because you can't put black dogs and crescents on the colored lower half of the field. So you would search this one, head dog, there's one head dog in this group of 3, primary charge group alone on the field. And then this crescent, there are 2 crescents in this group of 3, primary alone on the field. And below on this one is are some examples of split groups that are not primary. For not primary ones, for secondary or tertiary split charge groups, you can actually just put each part of the group on its own line. That's fine. By the time you're getting down to split charge groups, you're not going to find a lot of conflict. Okay. Did that change? Dang, I was hoping. Okay. So here in this white box on this page, you can see all of the features of groups. These are things that you can put in to indicate what kind of group they are. Are they a primary group? That's on line 166. Are they a secondary group? 167 there indicates the second is equal to secondary. So you could use either term. Are they sole primary? There's just one. You can use you can use primary. Sole primary is contained within primary. But here you can see we have SPA and SPNA. That would be sole primary and sole primary not alone on the field. Those are all held within sole primary, which is held within primary. So these are just go ahead and take a look. Know that it's there in the MyCat. If you search for the word group. And I want to just take a look at the top item there. You see a term we really haven't used yet called debruising. I just want to let you know that is the period term for an overall chart. So if you have an overall charge group, you want to use debruising as the term for it rather than primary or secondary. You know, to just know that it's there. And then some complex search form tips. We have remember. Each line on the form only counts for 1 DC. Don't put more than 1 DC on a line. If you do, your scores will be artificially lower than they need to be, and that will return more items than you want to look through. You only have to examine the results that are max score and then max score -1. Anything that's 2 or more automatically has 2 things that are different from your search terms. Split charges are tricky. You'll want to do each half in its own search if it's the primary charge group, and seek a second opinion if you're not confident. Augment. Yeah. So the comment says better to be overly picky than overly general. Yes. Yeah, in general, you should be overly picky. But remember that if you're working for somebody who is opinionated or very emotionally attached to their armory, it's better for you to say, I think it conflicts, but we can forward it or we can send it in, rather than turn them down. Because in the end, you as the Herald, you are not the one who makes that decision. I am not the one that makes the decision. Ragna's not, or our Escutcheon Herald is not the one that makes the decision. Alzbeta doesn't make the decision. The Laurel, excuse my traffic. The Laurel staff makes that decision. So if it comes down to you think it won't pass, but the submitter would like to send it up anyway, send it up. And then augmentations. Augmentations must be searched as if they were their own independent armory. This is pretty important because if you have an augmentation, say it's on a canton or something, and it's say you were given a augmentation of a circle, a white circle, a brass ring, then you need to search to make sure that that isn't owned by somebody already. If they had fieldless, a brass ring, that augmentation would basically be saying that you were given that by that person. So, excuse me. Hey, cat, knock it off. Go away. My apologies. So you want to make sure that you're conflict checking augmentations as if they were their own armory. Overall charge groups are called diversity. We covered that. You are still going to have to conflict check things manually. This form just helps you do it faster, and it helps you identify things you might have overlooked if you were doing it manually because you were trying to go too fast or because you didn't realize something was heraldically identical. So definitely, make sure that you use this, but also use your brain. It's not going to replace your brain. And if you have, say you search something and you have like 30 results, chances are you probably didn't put everything in. Add one more thing. That will cut the results down quite a bit. Okay, and then one more slide for you all. The links that I promised, here they are. They're also in the Facebook group as a comment. And I'm more than happy to send them to you if you need me to. You can find all of these things on the Society Heraldry page. That's heraldry.sca.org. Just a brief note about the precedence item. You can see there's a note here. I like to use morciolus.org rather than the precedence because it's searchable. There's a project right now called the President's Tagging Project, but it's not ready yet for use by the General Herald. So it's coming though. Eventually, we're going to be able to search precedents like we search the database itself, and it will be awesome. Are there any questions, things you wondered about, wanted to know? Please put them in the chat. I'd be more than happy to answer them. Otherwise, like I said, you can email me, you can chat me. Everybody knows how to get a hold of me. Well, I really want to thank you all for coming to my class today. This has been a bit of an adventure for me. Thank you so much for being patient with my slideshow problems. I hope that you go forth and enjoy heraldry and enjoy helping people out. It really brings me joy. I hope it brings you joy too.